It's amazing to think about, right, how much of our lives have gone digital. I mean,
Yeah.
everything, but healthcare, well, it's always been a bit behind. That is until now.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Smartwatches, tracking every little thing, video calls with the doc. It seems like tech is finally finding its place in healthcare.
Definitely. And you know what's really interesting? This shift is happening in a really big way in clinical trials.
You're talking about virtual clinical trials.
Exactly. It does sound kind of futuristic, right?
It does.
But it's happening right now.
So to really get a handle on this, we dove headfirst into a recent market analysis. It's full of all the latest numbers, predictions, a global snapshot of what's happening where.
Yeah, and our goal with this deep dive,
What is it?
it's to pull out the most important insights from this report.
Hmm.
We want to make sure you walk away really understanding the big trends, the size of this global market, and where it's all headed.
Now, I'm sure some of you listening might be thinking, wait, hold on. What exactly are virtual clinical trials?
All right, so basically a virtual clinical trial, or DCT for short, uses technology to do some or even all of a clinical study remotely.
Interesting.
Yeah, it can involve all sorts of things, like getting consent, electronically continuous monitoring with wearable devices, even having those telehealth visits, shipping study meds right to people's homes.
Wow.
They can even arrange for at-home lab sample collections.
That is pretty wild.
Yeah, so the main idea is to make it way easier for people to participate in these trials, right?
Okay, I see that.
And that can actually lead to faster enrollment and more diverse groups of people joining in on the research.
So that sounds like it's a win for everyone.
Totally.
Okay, so let's get into the data. What's this report saying about how big this whole thing is and where it's going globally?
All right, well, the numbers are pretty impressive. Get this, the global market for virtual clinical trials. It's expected to hit a whopping $9,860 million US dollars in 2025.
Okay.
But what's even more interesting is where it goes from there. By 2033, it's predicted to climb even higher to 15,954.13 million.
Wow.
That's a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR of 6.2% between 2025 and 2033.
Okay, so just so everyone's clear on a timeline,
Yep.
we're looking at projections based on 2024 data, right?
Yeah.
Looking ahead to 2033. And the analysts even factored in historical data from 2021 to 2024 to make those forecasts.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's zoom out for a minute and look at the whole world. Because obviously different parts of the world are adopting virtual clinical trials at different speeds. So North America, where does that stand?
Right now, North America is leading the pack.
Okay.
They've got the biggest slice of the market.
So what numbers are we talking about?
Well, in 2025, the North American virtual clinical trials market is predicted to be worth $3,648.2 million US dollars.
Okay.
That's over 40% of all the revenue globally. And the projected CAGR for the region, it's around 4.7% from 2025 to 2033.
So within North America, are there any countries that are really standing out?
Oh, for sure. The United States is really dominating.
Okay.
The market size there is estimated to be $2,878.43 million US dollars in 2025, with a CAGR of 4.5%.
Wow.
Yeah. And one of the really interesting things here is the FDA is increasingly supportive. They're putting out guidance to encourage this whole decentralized trial approach.
So having the FDA on board must be a huge help.
Yeah, it really paves the way.
So what about Canada and Mexico?
Well, in Canada, the market is expected to hit $437.78 million US dollars in 2025, with a CAGR of 5.5%. And that's likely because the Canadian government has been really investing in building up that digital health infrastructure across the country.
Makes sense.
Then you have Mexico, which is projected to have a market size of $331.99 million US dollars in 2025 and a CGR of 5.2%.
It's really interesting to see how, even within the same continent, things are moving at different paces.
Yeah.
So the report also highlights some of the big companies operating in North America, right?
Yeah, for sure. We've got Parexel, for instance. They've already done over 100 decentralized trials, both fully virtual and hybrid approaches.
Wow.
And then you've got Covance. They're leveraging their LabCorp patient service centers to really help with patient engagement and make it easier to get those tests done and samples collected closer to home.
Very convenient.
Oh, and one really interesting early example, the Chief HF study back in November 2019.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was done by Johnson & Johnson's Janssen with PRA Health Sciences. It was a fully decentralized trial. So you see, these concepts have been brewing for a while.
That's super interesting. Okay, so we've got a good picture of North America. Let's hop over to Europe now. What's happening with virtual clinical trials over there?
Europe is another major player for sure. They make up over 30% of the global market
Okay.
and their market size. It's estimated at 2,859.4 million US dollars in 2025. And their projected growth, a CAGR of 5.3% from 2025 to 2033.
So any standout countries leading the way in Europe?
Absolutely. The UK is one to watch. Their estimated market size is 480.38 million US dollars in 2025.
Okay.
And they've got a CGR of 6.1%.
Nice.
Yeah, they've got a really strong healthcare system, and they're really focused on digital health initiatives.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then Germany, they're another big one, with a market projected at 566.6 million US dollars in 2025,
Yeah.
and a CGR of 5.5%. They've got a great healthcare infrastructure, and they're digitizing like crazy across the board.
Okay.
Then you got France. They're a significant market, too, with a size of 263.06 million US dollars and a CGR of 4.5%.
So it sounds like a pretty mixed bag across Europe. What about some of the smaller European countries? What does the report say about them?
Yeah, so they actually give figures for a bunch of the smaller markets, too, like
Mhm.
Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, even Luxembourg. It's pretty interesting.
It is.
Even these smaller countries are jumping on board, especially if they have good digital infrastructure. And the report lumps the rest of the countries together as rest of Europe.
Okay.
And that group has a combined market size of 400.33 Jace, 2 million US dollars in 2025, and a CAGR of 4%.
So besides the obvious trend of everyone going digital, is there anything specific driving Europe to adopt these virtual trials?
Yeah, there's an interesting point in the report about sustainability and environmental compliance. Europe is really big on that stuff, right?
Cute.
So virtual trials actually fit in really well because they cut down on travel for both patients and staff, and they reduce the environmental impact of having all those physical sites.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, and this factor is probably even more important in places like Germany, France, and the UK.
Totally. Okay, so let's shift gears now and head over to the Asia-Pacific region. That's usually a region with big growth in most industries, right? So what about virtual clinical trials?
You're absolutely right. The Asia-Pacific region, or APAC as they call it, holds about 23% of the global market for virtual clinical trials. Their estimated market size in 2025, 2,366.4 million US dollars.
Wow.
And their projected growth, it's the highest in the world. We're talking a CAGR of 8.9% from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so 8.9%. That's way higher than the other regions we've talked about. So what's behind those numbers? What's making them adopt these trials so quickly?
A few things. First, you've got China. They're a big part of this, with a market size of 993.89 million US dollars in 2025 and a strong CAGR of 8.4%.
Okay.
And they have a massive population, right? So there's a huge pool of potential participants for trial.
Makes sense.
Then there's Japan. They're already well established in research. In fact, they were leading the APAC market back in 2020. But they're still projected to grow at a solid CAGR of 7.4% with a market size of 326.56 million US dollars in 2025. And then you have South Korea, India, Australia, Singapore, Thailand, all showing great growth with CAGRs between 8% and 10.8%.
So India's growth is really impressive, 10.8%. What's driving that?
Well, the report points to the Indian government. They've been really proactive in promoting clinical research. They're streamlining regulations and trying to encourage innovation in the pharma and biotech sectors.
Okay.
So you've got this government support combined with a huge, diverse population and increasing use of digital tech. It's the perfect recipe for virtual clinical trials to take off.
And what about the rest of the Asia-Pacific region? Southeast Asia, for example.
Yeah, Southeast Asia is predicted to have a market size of 156.18 million US dollars in 2025 with a CAGR of 9.7%. So they're definitely on the move.
Yeah.
And the rest of APAC is estimated at 106.49 million with a CAGR of 8.7%.
Yep.
So overall, the big drivers in APAC are the large patient populations and the increasing access and use of digital health technologies.
Okay.
Plus, the COVID pandemic, well, that really pushed things along too.
How so?
It sped up the acceptance of things like telemedicine and remote monitoring, which are key for virtual clinical trials.
Okay, so let's move a little further south. How about South America? Where do they stand with virtual clinical trials?
South America makes up over 5% of the global market.
Okay.
They have an estimated size of 374.68 million US dollars in 2025, and the region is expected to grow at a CAGR of 6.9% between 2025 and 2033.
So which countries in South America are really active in this area?
Right now, Brazil is the leader. Their market size is projected at 160.36 million US dollars in 2025. and they have a CAGR of 7.5%. That's mostly because they've been integrating digital tech into their healthcare system.
Okay.
And Argentina is right behind them with a market size of 62.95 million US dollars and a CAGR of 7.8%. And that's probably because their pharma and biotech sectors are growing. Then you've got Colombia, Peru, and Chile, all with developing virtual clinical trial markets that are adding to the regional growth.
So why are virtual trials becoming more popular in South America?
Well, one big reason is the cost. Traditional clinical trials are expensive.
Definitely.
So pharmaceutical companies and research organizations are looking for ways to save money. Virtual trials are a good option for that.
Okay.
Plus, more people in South America are getting access to mobile phones and the internet. That makes it easier to use the technology needed for virtual trials and to collect data remotely. And of course, there's the issue of chronic diseases. The number of people with chronic diseases is rising, so they need faster, more accessible ways to do research.
That makes sense. Okay, let's switch gears again. What about the Middle East? They have a pretty unique healthcare system, right? What does the report say about virtual clinical trials there?
Yeah, so the Middle East holds about 2% of the global market for virtual clinical trials. Their estimated market size in 2025, it's 394.4 million US dollars,
Okay.
and they're projected to have a SAMOR of 7.5% from 2025 to 2033.
So who are the big players in the Middle East?
Saudi Arabia and the UAE are leading the way. They've got the largest markets with estimated sizes of 138.83 million and 81.25 million US dollars respectively in 2025. And both of them have really strong CAGRs. Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt are also developing their markets, which is contributing to the overall growth in the region.
So what's driving the Middle East to adopt virtual trials?
Well, chronic diseases are a big factor.
Okay.
Things like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer are on the rise there.
Right.
So there's a greater need for efficient clinical research. And virtual trials offer a good way to reach those patient populations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, people in the Middle East are really embracing digital health technologies like wearable devices and telemedicine, and their governments are also supporting healthcare innovation. All of that's helping to fuel the growth of the market.
Okay, last stop on our world tour, Africa. They've got their own unique challenges when it comes to healthcare, right? So what's the outlook for virtual trials there?
Yeah, Africa currently holds about 1% of the global market for virtual clinical trials. Their estimated size in 2025, 216.910 million US dollars. And their projected CAGR is 6.5% from 2025 to 2033.
And in Africa, which countries are leading the charge?
South Africa has the biggest market at the moment. It's projected to be 76.36 million US dollars in 2025 with a CAGR of 7.4%. Nigeria is also developing their market, which is adding to those regional figures.
So what's driving the adoption of virtual trials in Africa specifically?
Well, there's a huge need for research in Africa. Chronic diseases like cancer, tuberculosis, and HIV/AIDS are major problems.
Right.
And virtual trials could really speed up that research and reach more people across the continent. Plus, a lot of people in Africa don't have easy access to hospitals or specialist care.
I can see that being a huge problem.
Yeah, it is. So virtual trials can help overcome those geographical barriers. And of course, they're more cost-effective than traditional trials, which is really important in places where resources are limited.
That makes sense.
And even though it's still developing, mobile technology is growing in Africa.
Right.
That means they can collect data remotely and have better interactions with patients, which makes virtual trials more and more feasible.
So we've seen how different parts of the world are adopting these virtual trials, but the report also breaks things down by the type of study design and the medical condition they're looking at. Can we dive into that a bit?
Absolutely.
So what kinds of virtual clinical trials are out there?
Well, when it comes to study design, interventional trials are predicted to be the biggest segment.
Okay.
That's because labs are becoming more digital, and there's a huge increase in drug trials for all sorts of illnesses. And the pandemic, well, that really accelerated things because traditional trials were riskier with the potential for infections and disruptions.
So we're seeing a move toward virtual trials that are focused on testing new treatments.
Exactly. But then you have the expanded access segment.
What's that?
Was basically giving people access to new medications even before they're fully approved.
Okay.
And that segment is predicted to have the fastest growth. And the reason for that is new variants of diseases.
Oh,
They
right.
pop up all the time, and they create this urgent need for new meds, especially when there aren't many other treatment options.
I see.
So expanded access trials help to bridge that gap.
That makes a lot of sense. So what about the medical conditions being studied in these virtual trials? What are the main areas of focus?
Well, right now, oncology is taking the biggest chunk of the market.
Oncology, so cancer.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are just more and more clinical trials focused on cancer, and sadly, cancer rates are increasing globally. The pandemic also showed how important virtual trials are in oncology. They can keep those immunocompromised patients safe and make sure that vital research continues.
And are there any other significant areas they're focusing on?
Yeah, the cardiovascular segment is growing rapidly. That's because heart problems are becoming more and more common worldwide.
It's scary how many people are affected by that.
It really is. The report actually mentions statistics from the WHO and the CDC that showed just how big of a problem it is globally. So more research is desperately needed in that area.
So it's clear that these virtual trials are becoming a major part of tackling some of the biggest health challenges we face. But what's fueling this growth? What are the underlying forces driving this whole thing forward?
The report identifies a few key market drivers. First off, there's more research and development happening in the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. And virtual trials are just a more efficient way to do those trials and reach more people. Second, healthcare is becoming increasingly digital. Think electronic health records, wearable devices, digital communication tools.
Right.
That lays the groundwork for virtual trials to really thrive. And third, telehealth is becoming more widely accepted.
Definitely.
That makes it easier to have those remote patient interactions, which are a key part of virtual trials.
So it sounds like a lot of things are lining up perfectly for this to happen, but are there any roadblocks? Anything that's holding back virtual clinical trials from becoming even more widespread?
The report mentions a few restraints on the market. Regulation is still a big hurdle.
How so?
Well, the rules and guidelines for virtual trials are still evolving, and they can vary quite a bit from country to country. It's a bit of a mess, really.
Yeah, that sounds tricky.
And then there's data privacy and security.
Of course.
I mean, we're talking about sensitive health information here,
Right.
and that data is being collected and sent remotely.
So security has to be a top priority. What about the future? Any predictions about what trends will shape this field in the years to come?
Oh, definitely. Technology will keep pushing things forward, for sure. We're going to see better wearable sensors, more advanced telehealth platforms, and sophisticated data analytics. All that will make virtual trials even better, more efficient, and able to generate really high-quality data.
That makes sense.
Plus, government support and regulations will play a big role, too. Things like that FDA guidance we talked about earlier in the U.S., that's really helping to boost the adoption of virtual trials.
So we need both technology and a supportive environment for this to really succeed. Now, the report also talks about the big companies in the virtual clinical trial market. Who are the major players?
There are quite a few. The report mentions Icon Parexel, IQVIA Covance, PRA Health Sciences, which is now part of Icon, the Leo Innovation Lab, Metadata, which is owned by Dassault Systems, Oracle CRF Health Clinical Inc., Medable Signet Health Halo Health Systems, and Croprime. They're all major competitors in this space.
Wow, that is a lot. So how are all these companies staying competitive?
They're doing a few things. First, they're investing heavily in R&D. They're working on improving their virtual trial platforms, coming up with new tech to get patients more involved, and streamline the way data is collected.
So it's an innovation race?
Pretty much. They also want to make trials more efficient overall.
Okay.
And they're forming partnerships. They're teaming up with tech companies, research institutions, and regulatory bodies. It's all about sharing resources and knowledge, expanding their reach into new markets, and getting better at designing and running these complex virtual trials.
Are there any recent examples of this that stand out in the report?
Yeah, there are a couple. In June of 2024, IQVA launched a new digital platform called One Home for Sites TM.
Okay.
It's designed to make life easier for clinical research sites. It's like a one-stop shop where they can access all the systems and manage all the tasks for their trials, including the virtual ones. It's a good example of how the industry is focusing on making things smoother for everyone involved in decentralized trials.
That sounds super useful. What's the other example?
Well, in October 2022, Oracle and Avio Health partnered up.
Okay.
They're focusing on virtual and decentralized trials in the Asia-Pacific region. And their big goal, they want to be able to collect, integrate, and analyze data from all sorts of sources.
Why?
Labs, wearable devices, patients, and trial sites. It really highlights how important it is to have a good handle on data management in these virtual trials.
So the takeaway is virtual clinical trials are not only growing in size, but also in how innovative and collaborative they are.
Definitely.
So let's wrap this up. What are the key takeaways from our deep dive into the world of virtual clinical trials?
Well, we've seen that the market is set for major growth. We're talking almost $10 billion in 2025, and close to $16 billion by 2033.
And what's driving that growth?
It's a combination of things. Healthcare is going digital. There's more research and development in pharma and biotech. And telehealth and remote monitoring are becoming more common. We also saw that different regions are adopting these trials at different rates. North America is the biggest market now, but the Asia-Pacific region is expected to grow the fastest. And we looked at different types of trials, like those interventional trials, and how they're focusing on specific conditions like cancer and heart disease.
It's really amazing to see this shift happening. I mean, that projected global market size of 9,860 million US dollars in 2025 and a CAGR of 6.2%.
Hmm,
Those numbers really tell the story.
they really do. So now we have a question for you, our listener. Given all this growth and all the factors at play, what do you think the long-term impact of virtual clinical trials will be on healthcare and drug development? As this field keeps evolving, are there any new challenges or opportunities that we might not be seeing yet? It's a really exciting area to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive, but we'll be back soon with another exciting topic, so stay tuned.
See you then.